Hey, welcome back to Big Al Books. I'm Alex, and today I'll be telling you about my favorite reads from 2021. Have I uploaded a video on this channel in 6 months? No. Am I gonna let that stop me? No. Because, you know what? The books that I read in 2021 are too good. They deserve so much more, so I really have to make this video sending out my unsolicited opinions out on YouTube, and hopefully you'll enjoy hearing about this list of incredible books. I tried my best to make this a top 10 list like in years previous, but I will be cheating a little bit here and there. But one thing I noticed as I was putting my list together is that there were kind of three main categories of books that I seemed to be drawn to the most from my reading in 2021. So that's how I'll be structuring this video. The first category is comfort reads. These are the books that just brought me the most joy throughout the year and really made me love reading. The second category is inspirational nonfiction. And the third category is highlights from my 20th century reading project, which I finally completed this year. It's been quite a few years that I've been working on this, but I've been trying to read one book published in each year of the 20th century. So I'm finally done with that, although the project's not exactly over because there's just so much amazing stuff from the 20th century. It's not really a century that you can exhaust in any kind of way, but I wanted to share with you in this video some of the true standouts, some of the books that I just ended up loving the most from that project this year. And then my top book of the year is a classic, and that doesn't fit in with the other categories, so I will save that one for the end. So yeah, hopefully that sounds good, and we will get into the books. To begin, let's start off with my three favorite comfort reads of the year. Two of them are actually 2021 new releases, and I think partly the reason why these were comfort reads is that they're both by authors who I have previously enjoyed their work before. I just felt so safe already going into these books, and I knew from page one in both of them that I was going to have the best time. So let's start off with The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. This book follows the perspective of a woman named Tookie who, after finishing her prison sentence, gets a job at a bookstore. And that bookstore is based off of Birch Bark Books, which Louise Erdrich runs in real life, the awesome Indigenous-owned indie bookstore in Minnesota, that it's now on my bookish bucket list. I have to go there one day. So, first of all, if you're a book lover, you will just love that setting. It is so warm and it is so great reading about what it's like to run an independent bookstore in these strange times. This book is also really centered around the year 2020, which I honestly never thought I would want to read about. To be honest, 2020 was enough the first time around. I don't want to go back and revisit all of those times in fiction, but I have to say, I feel like Louise Erdrich pulled it off, because though we're all very familiar with the events that happened in 2020, you're experiencing them through someone else's perspective. And luckily, Louise Erdrich writes fantastic characters, and again, her settings are just so rich and wonderful that it's kind of cool seeing these familiar events and just seeing how other people dealt with these same experiences. So I have to say, there was something that was kind of cathartic and interesting actually about returning back to this year that I never thought I would want to see in fiction. Also, the bookstore appears to be haunted by the ghost of a former customer, which only Tookie seems to be noticing. So it's not just straight up reportage of 2020. There are these fascinating mystical elements in the story as well. So overall, I would recommend this book to any book lovers out there who want a bit of an inside look at what it's like working at an indie bookshop. Also, for anyone looking for some more perspective on 2020, if you're still processing the events of that year and their implications, this is a great book to do that from a different vantage point. Also, Louise Erdrich has a ton of books, and I think that this is a really good starting point if you're new to her work. It's accessible, it's welcoming, it is wonderful, and I loved reading every page of this book. The other 2021 new release that I just adored was Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. And here's the thing. There's no way that you can sell this book to someone and make it sound cool, because really it is about church youth group drama happening in the Midwest in the 1970s. It's not an exciting premise. So if you're looking for really cool, neat, cutting edge modern fiction, I don't think that Crossroads is the book for you. However, if you don't need a flashy plot to keep you interested, and if you are interested in exploring human dynamics, how communities function, and especially the family unit, then this book is fascinating and so wonderful. So I knew I was going to be obsessed with this book. I'm pretty sure on page 1 there's a reference to the father of this family, who is a pastor at the church, and there's a reference to something referred to as his humiliation, but it doesn't tell you what that is. And honestly, I'm just such a nosy person. Like, if there's some kind of gossip or event like this, I just needed to know what that was. So that's really what drew me into the book at first, and that's what sustained me all the way through. Because if you are just curious about people and how their minds work and how they connect with one another, I just feel like Jonathan Franzen is so good at taking you into people's minds. And he's so good at just like showing you what people think about themselves and then contrasting that with what other people think about them. And of course, those visions just never match up. It just creates these tragic mismatches and mishaps, and it just keeps happening again after every chapter in this book. And that's what's kind of scary. Like, this book is looking at one small, kind of normal family. We get to see the perspectives of the 2 parents of the family and 3 of their children. And the thing is, like, your family should be, in theory, the people that you know the best, because you live together and you spend so much time together and you know all these things about each other. But what I found slightly horrifying about this book is that you realize that the members in this family actually don't know very much about each other at all. Because of course you can't. Can you really know another human? Like, there's just so much that happens in our minds. And if you're a child, you don't know so much about your parents' backstory. Like, what kind of person were they before they got married and had a kid? And this book explores all of those ambitions that you have when you're younger in life, that you kind of sacrifice to live a kind of more normal family life. I found this book did a great job of reminding us just how limited our perspective is, including those who we think that we love the most. And I don't think that this book did that to like make us feel bad about things and for it to be like mean and scary, but rather to remind us to show a bit more compassion and to try to understand that everyone that we meet has so much of a bigger story than we ever can really have access to. So I really love when I'm reading Jonathan Franzen, it feels so effortless and easy. Like, I kind of feel like I'm watching a movie or a TV show, yet at the same time, his writing is not something that could be captured in a movie or a TV show, because he is just always taking you inside the minds of people, and he's so good at making that seem so smooth and seamless. So I really love his books for that, and I feel like he's just at a new level with this series. This is apparently the first book in what's going to be a trilogy, and all I know is like I cannot wait to dive back into the story, hopefully to meet these characters again at another point in their life. And that to me is a pretty good marker for success, because this is already a pretty long novel and I would happily go back for more as soon as it's available. Can't wait to see where the series is going over time. But something I thought was cool is that it's historical fiction, but it was still addressing a lot of contemporary issues that we're having conversations about today. So it didn't really end up feeling that dated. Like, for example, one concept that I thought was interesting was this idea of like white saviorism, because the father of the family, as a minister, he tries to do lots of work in inner city churches as well as on reservations with Native Americans. And I liked that this book was questioning how much good this church group was truly doing in these communities. And you kind of wonder what the minister's motivations are, if this is work that truly needs to be done, that's really helping these communities, or if he's just trying to get a bit of clout because like it's cool having these connections, knowing an indigenous nation in Arizona where you can take your youth group for like a cool spring vacation. So I like that this book was kind of trying to ask some of these questions, but it was also enjoyable to have like the 70s hippie setting going on as well. So yeah, Crossroads is not a cool book by any means, but if you're looking for some truly rewarding, insightful fiction, you have to pick this one up. And my last comfort read on this list was Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons, and I had been putting off reading this one for a good few years because it is really hailed as a comic masterpiece, and I was kind of afraid that it just wouldn't live up to the hype for me, but I had nothing to worry about. All of my fears did not come true. I really found this to be a hilarious, delightful read. It's basically a parody of the rural English Gothic tradition. So think about books set in the dreary English countryside, like Wuthering Heights, think some Thomas Hardy, some Precious Bane, that kind of era of books. But what I loved about it is that it kind of imagines what would happen if a normal, well-adjusted, cheerful person were to get transported into the plot of one of these rural Gothic novels. And that's what happens in this book to Flora Post. She has these English relatives that she needs to stay with for a while, and she is just kind of bewildered at what is happening with these people because, you know, Gothic characters are very exaggerated. They're very moody. They're always dealing with these dark, twisted tragedies. And Flora's just like, what is going on around here? And instead of getting drawn into the subplot with them, she tries to just be practical and pragmatic and to try to find solutions for all of their problems. And she just tries to fix things up around the farm, and it's hilarious watching her journey. It's so great getting to know each member of this family. They're all strange in their own kind of way. This book is really well known for some of its famous quotations as well, so you should read this book to get the reference and to know what was going on in the woodshed and all of that. Also, for the record, I feel like I should state I love the rural English Gothic tradition. Like, so many of those books I unironically love, but I still loved seeing Stella Gibbons just absolutely skewer them in this book. So it was a really funny piece of satire while also just being an enjoyable story on its own. So if you're looking for a ridiculous book that will cheer up your spirits, you should totally check out Cold Comfort Farm. My next category will be inspirational nonfiction. These are books that taught me a lot, but more importantly, they just made me fall more in love with the world. So to start off the list is going to be Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard. This book is very Walden-esque in premise. Essentially, Annie Dillard wanted to try to live more intentionally in the natural world. So she spends a year living near this creek in Virginia, and she just tries to observe everything. And that ultimately is what a good writer is. It's someone who is able to observe, to witness the wild and wonderful things that are happening around them. And typically, writers will write about people, but Annie Dillard is just focused on the plants, the trees, the water, the animals, the insects, truly everything that she can see around her in this book. So for a book really without characters aside from Annie Dillard herself, it's still amazingly able to retain your attention because she is just so perceptive. Like, there's so much insight in this book that it really blows my mind. And one of the other reasons why I really loved this book is because I read it pretty much cover to cover while I was outside. So I would go for a walk every day, take this book with me, read 10 pages or so here or there, and I just, read a sentence of this book and look up and just like appreciate everything that I was seeing so much more. So I loved that the infectious spirit of curiosity in this book was really able to make me appreciate my own life and the nature that I am fortunate enough to be able to observe as well around me. I'm not quite as remote as she is, so I didn't see quite as many amazing things. But still, this book really inspires you to want to be a better observer because there are amazing things happening around us all the time. And not only beautiful things, that's what I liked about this book, is that it's not trying to like glorify nature or reduce it to just being this pretty, beautiful thing for us to appreciate. Annie Dillard really like captures just how kind of wild and improbable nature is. She kind of wonders what the purpose of all this beauty is, but she also writes about all the like grotesque and disgusting things that happen in nature as well. And I was equally drawn to those chapters as well. So this was just a joyous reading experience all around. There's so much life in this book. Also, Annie Dillard includes so many references and quotations to other books. She just packs so many ideas into these pages that it's kind of overwhelming, but like in the best way possible. So this book taught me so much about what it means to truly see, what it means to be a person in the world, and also about how to capture these ideas and put them down into incredible jaw-dropping sentences on the page. So I really loved checking this one out. But I do have to cheat and mention another book that was kind of nature writing that I feel like also deserves to be mentioned. And that one is The Turquoise Ledge by Leslie Marmon Silko. This book is set in the desert, and it's just kind of a memoir of another like year in the life of the author as she just kind of observes the natural world around her. I didn't really know that I liked deserts until I read this book, and I was just obsessed with the atmosphere and the aesthetic of this one. And I feel like both of these books really captured the tone of the places that they were writing about. So like Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, you know, this creek has like this like bubbling, infectious, joyful energy, and I feel like Annie Dillard really had that, whereas like the desert is like cool and mystical, and you don't really understand everything that's happening. And that's what Leslie Marmon Silko does. She is writing about the star beings who are communicating from another realm with humans. She's reading about the rattlesnakes that you have to somewhat make peace with because they are going to be stealing your water living in your yard. Her life is so different from my own, but I really loved learning what life is like in this kind of extreme place to live. So these are my top 2 natural reads of the year. Next on my list is The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity by David Graeber and David Wengrow. I don't even know where to begin with this one. It's massive and it is just mind-blowing. Like, there is just something wild on every page of this book. And I feel like this is a book that people are going to have controversial takes about. Now, I have to say that I'm not like the most well-informed in the fields of anthropology or archaeology, but I do know that these 2 authors are kind of trying to reframe how we view the history of human civilization. So like kind of the way that I was taught about human civilization is that it's kind of this linear journey of progress, and that one step kind of leads to the next, and it makes human progress seem like it's kind of logical and that it's inevitable. So like we live the way that we do because we had to end up this way because of the choices that were made in the past. Now, these 2 authors would argue that based on this new evidence that we're finding over time, we need to reframe our thinking, and we need to start asking different questions about how humans have lived in the past, because it's not helpful to just continue to re-perpetuate these narratives, because they're saying that there really is no one way to end up with civilization, and that many cultures around the world have kind of shown that it is totally possible to evolve in completely different directions. And also they're writing about how cultures make conscious decisions. So they may try something new and then decide that it's not right for them and they want to change, and we have the power to kind of decide how we should be as a society. So they are kind of showing us the history of the past and different possibilities that may have happened. But really, this book is asking us to question our own society today. The authors are wondering why we've become kind of stuck as humans. We really feel like we can't make significant changes to our society because it's just the way that it is, and there's too many people and it would be too complicated to ever change or try something new. And that's just not really true. Like, humans, they argue, have always had this potential to assess where we're at, to try new things, to figure out different ways of being. So this book, I feel like, was really inspirational in that way, because sometimes when I think about the future, I get a little hopeless about it, and you just feel like there's just like no possibility for making a planet that's like better for everyone. But I feel like this book does try to remind us and empower us. I forgot to mention this when I was filming earlier, so I'm coming back here to mention this, but The Dawn of Everything really also influenced how I was reading fiction. So like, for example, I was reading the book The Dispossessed by Ursula K. LeGuin, which is also a brilliant book, could easily be on this list as well. But this book was made like 10 times better because I was thinking about the concepts that were being explored in The Dawn of Everything, and this was like a fictional representation of what was happening. Because so many science fiction novels have to do with these questions about societies, and this one in particular is about contrasting different ways of being. So I feel like the ideas about humanity and civilization and freedom that I was reading about in The Dawn of Everything really showed up in a lot of the other books that I would go on to read. And I think that's just really cool when nonfiction is able to impact your worldview and the way that you're engaging with other texts at the same time. Okay, so this next book on my list is nonfiction, but it also is a bonus because it contains some Russian short stories in it. So this really is your best bargain of all the books on this list. This is A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders, in which 4 Russians give a masterclass on writing, reading, and life. This one has to be my most enjoyable read of the year because I think every page in this made me smile, and it just made my heart swell, and it made me just fall in love with the act of reading, like, again and again. And I just feel like this book is such a gift because George Saunders, whose writing I already really loved before I read this book, but I never read his nonfiction before. But anyway, George Saunders was a professor at Syracuse University, and he would teach an entire course dedicated to the Russian short story. And he's taught this course for like quite a few years, and this book is kind of like the distilled insight that he has gleaned from studying these stories over the course of so many years. And I just think that it was so generous of him to write this book and to share that information more widely, you know, with Joe Public out here, because like I was never able to take a course on the Russian short story. And, you know, honestly, back when I was 19 years old, I probably wouldn't have signed up to take that class. But like now, at this point in my life, that sounds like the greatest class ever. Like I would lose my mind in a class like that now. But it's so cool that even though, you know, I didn't have that experience firsthand, I'm still able to like learn from like such a master of the form of the short story. And of course, George Saunders is very humble, so he's not really touting himself as any kind of amazing technician. He is really focusing on the works of Chekhov and Gogol and Tolstoy. And you know, some of these were stories that I had read before reading this, but just the layers that George Saunders was able to uncover in his analysis was astounding. Like, I feel like I really got to learn so much more about what a short story actually is and like how fiction works on kind of more of a craft level and how to appreciate those choices that authors are making to make us continue forward in their stories. So this book is absolutely a must read if you have any interest at all in the form of the short story, in Russian literature, or if you just want to be a better, more attentive reader and possibly even a better human. Like if you want to understand people a little bit more. This book just has an endless amount of insights, and I truly love that there's nothing pretentious or academic about it. George Saunders is so welcoming, so inviting, and he's just precious as heck. Like, there are so many passages in this that just really made me love who he is as a human communicating with me through the page. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about this. I truly loved this book. So in classic Big Al Books fashion, the sun is starting to set and my lighting will begin quickly deteriorating, but I'm just not done talking about books yet. So let's get into the kind of final category that I had, and that was some standouts from my 20th century reading project for this year. So back in 2020, my reading highlight of the year was Proust's In Search of Lost Time, which is definitely leaning towards more like the early quarter of the 20th century. This year, I really seemed to enjoy books towards the end of the 20th century. So I think 2 of these are from the 80s and one of them is from 1990. So that was really the decade that I was just like drawn towards for some reason this year. So let's get into them. The first one is Canadian, and that is In the Skin of a Lion by Michael Ondaatje. And here's a confession. I went into this book with like really low expectations. I kind of didn't really think that Ondaatje was going to be an author that I connected with for some reason. I just knew that he was like very poetic in style, which I can sometimes find off-putting, but in this book, that was exactly why I loved this book. This book is so much about its poetic images. I read this book in January, and it has stuck with me all year. Like, I can still close my eyes and see some of these images. First of all, the setting of this book is really cool. It's exploring Toronto, but back in the 1920s and the 1930s, when the city was still very much in the process of becoming the city that we know it as today. And really, this book is looking into the lives of the workers who helped to shape the city and kind of build it from the ground up. So it was really cool getting this perspective that you don't often see. Usually books that are set in cities kind of glamorize life in the city. You get to see rich people going around having a grand old time, but this book was really actively trying to explore different perspectives. So like I mentioned before, it's really the rich, powerful, poetic imagery that has stuck with me with this book. So for example, here's one scene. A boy sneaks out of his house in the dead of night on a frosty winter's evening to watch this group of Finnish immigrants who work on his father's farm gather together to skate in the moonlight as they hold up these torches made of rushes that have been set on fire. How magical is that? I can also picture the image of a windy night on a bridge in construction in Toronto where this nun accidentally gets swept up in the gust and then is saved from falling by a construction worker. You also get to explore rather unknown parts of Toronto, like its aqueducts. And then lastly, like one scene that I just really love from this book, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's like hilarious or amazing or terrible or whatever. There's this man who wants to impress this woman that he's fallen in love with. They're in a bedroom, and he puts a blindfold on himself, and then he tells her not to move. And then he proceeds to start like absolutely flying around the room. He's like jumping and soaring all over, jumping on the bed, going around all the furniture. It's supposed to be this remarkable feat of agility and prowess. And then the lady decides to disobey him and she moves, and then he like thwacks right into her and causes this nosebleed, and he's like crying and he's like, I told you not to move. And like, what do you do with that? Like, I've never seen something as confusing as that in literature, and I kind of loved it. Like, it is so strange. The characters in here are real weirdos, but I really liked that about this book. I found it so moving and such a cool depiction of Toronto in a new kind of light for me. Next up is Possession by A.S. Byatt, and from what I can gather on Goodreads, this book is quite polarizing. So people either get obsessed with this book and love it with every fiber of their being, or they think that it is just pretentious garbage. So obviously this book is high up on my list of my favorite reads of the year, so it's no surprise that I am a sucker for this one. I loved it so much, and this was another book that like I've owned for like quite a few years, but I've been kind of avoiding it because again, it seems to be like a bit of a controversial one. But I thought this was such an immersive, incredible read. Now, I read this book when I was on my spring vacation, and I really tried to like savor the reading experience. So I would only get to read it for 1 hour every night while I was on break. And like when I tell you, I cherished that time. Like it was so special and I looked forward to it all day. I was like, I can't wait to go to bed and to read some Possession. It was so good. At the same time, I also found this dark academia reading playlist, and the music fits so well with the mood in this book that I actually like can't listen to that playlist anymore because to me it is just like attached with Possession. It doesn't feel right reading it and exploring other fictional worlds. It's about two academics. They study Victorian poets, and A.S. Byatt wanted to be extra with this book, so she decided to invent two Victorian poets for these two characters to study. And these two academics come across a bit of an intriguing possible secret. So they find some original source material, they start asking some questions, and it's really about that quest for knowledge. So the title of Possession, you know, you think it has to do with love and people getting obsessed with each other romantically, but it's about so much more than that. And I really loved the question about the possession for knowledge and why we are so hungry as readers and we just always want to know more. And especially as scholars, you kind of feel this ownership over your subject. You want to be the person who knows the person that you're studying the best, and you want that information, and you almost want to keep it safe and private with you. You don't want everyone in the whole world coming in and just kind of doing with it what they will. So I do like that this book was exploring these kind of different quests that we have for love, for knowledge, for respect. All of those kind of things are being explored in here. And the structure of this book, I think, is the reason why it's a bit polarizing, because the section with the Victorian academics is actually pretty plot heavy. Like, there are a lot of events that are happening, and it's pretty fast-paced, but then A.S. Byatt also decides to transport us back in time through the letters and journals and poems of these fictional poets that these academics are studying. And that does kind of put the plot to a halt. Byatt writes in this Victorian style, so the two sections are very different from each other, so it can be kind of jarring to go back and forth and back and forth. But I think even though the poets section isn't quite as like fast-paced, it's still really engaging, and what you read in that section is really going to affect what you read in the next section in the contemporary scenes. Like, I just felt like they were so like properly linked together that it really didn't bother me, and I found both of these poets to be just as equally fascinating, if not more so, than their contemporary counterparts. So I feel like that's why this book is a feat of literature. It's so impressive to be able to pull off both of those plots in the contemporary and the historical setting, to make a compelling set of characters in both worlds that you care about, to go to the effort of making these epic Victorian poems that are fascinating. So this is kind of another one, like I was saying with Crossroads, where like this book isn't like the coolest book, it doesn't have the most flashy premise, but if you give it a chance, and especially if you're a book nerd, which I suspect you might be if you're here on my channel, then you just might fall in love with this one. It is such a good time and a story that will really stick with you. The best novel that I encountered for the first time in 2021 has to be The Transit of Venus by Shirley Hazzard. This book messed me up. I'm still not over this book. And it's one that I picked up on a whim. I saw it on the shelves at my local bookstore, and I didn't need this one for my 20th century project. I had already read a book from 1980, but still, I was drawn to it. For some reason, I thought I should pick it up, and I read it quite quickly after I bought it, and I feel like that's so appropriate because this book is really all about the workings of fate. So I do feel on that summer's day, I was fated to buy this book. I did have to find Shirley Hazzard. She is just so perfect for my tastes as a reader. However, this is an example of like fate doing something nice for you. This book is actually a lot more about fate just absolutely destroying people's lives. So it's a really heavy, sad book, but yet one that I like can't stop thinking about. This book follows the lives of 4 interconnected characters, 2 of whom are sisters, and we see them from the 1950s through to the 1980s. So you really get to see the characters change over time in this book, especially in their relationships with each other. And the thing is, like, it's a slim book. So it's not really like you're spending that much time with them at each stage in their life. But the reason why we need to see them at different points is because we have to see the choices that they make and the consequences of those choices, as well as this unpredictable element of fate, the things that are just like destined to happen to them. And like the way that life kind of breaks everyone in the end. Like I said, it's kind of a pessimistic view in this book because it really presents this view of the world as just incredibly unstable. Like, instability haunts these characters at every turn in their life. And I really like that each of the characters kind of chose different pathways. So like one of the characters had a really awesome career. One of them chose to be a mother and start a family. So like they all do these different things. They try to live their lives in different good ways. And yet something will happen that is completely out of their control that will send them in a total tailspin. This book is kind of terrifying, but it is also so awe-inspiring watching an author with so much command in order to like really pull off the gravitas of this novel. I also feel like I have to mention on like a sentence by sentence level, Shirley Hazzard is a fantastic writer, and she has this kind of dry style, but she has this very odd way of describing things in words that you just haven't heard before. So like, for example, I just picked this book open to a random page and it had a description of 2 little girls playing with toys at school, and this is how she described it. Never did they dream, fingering those toys and even being, in a rather grown-up way, amused by them, that they were handling fateful signals of the future. The trinkets were assembled with collective meaning, like exhibits in a crime, or like explosives no expert could diffuse. So that's the kind of ominous writing you're going to be encountering within the pages of this book, but I really liked the strange style. It really just like made me see life from a different perspective. And it's kind of the same with the characters in this book. They're not designed to be like likable and approachable. They're kind of cryptic. We only see parts of their lives, but those flashes that we get are so fascinating. So this is a book whose style I truly loved, whose story like haunts me to the core of my being. And it sounds dramatic, but I feel like this book kind of took a piece of my soul away. Like I feel like I'm a little bit different after having read this book, but I do also feel like it was worth the trade. So this was an incredible find from my 20th century reading project, and I know I will be reading a lot more Shirley Hazzard in the years to come. Okay, so here we are at the end of the list. My favorite read of the year was not comforting or cozy. It was not nonfiction, and it was not a 20th century novel. It was a collection of Greek tragedies. This year, my favorite read of the year was the Oresteia by Aeschylus. What can I say except that cursed, dysfunctional family dramas are just my thing, and it doesn't matter if it's a contemporary novel that was published this year or if it's a Greek tragedy from thousands of years ago. That is just the kind of story that I am always seeming to be reaching for. And the cool thing about the Oresteia is that I actually got to read it in 2 different translations at 2 different points in the year. So when I first encountered it, it was back in July, and this is the translation by David Grene and Richard Lattimore. And I definitely loved the Oresteia the first time that I encountered it in July. These plays are just so gripping and striking. Also, after reading them, I was watching this production that was posted on YouTube. I think it was like an old National Theatre production where the cast is like wearing the masks, and it's so weird and creepy, and I really loved that, to like pair that along with these plays. So I really had a moment with this back in July. And then I decided to end my year in December by reading Anne Carson's translation. Hers is called An Oresteia, and she presents different viewpoints on this tragedy by including plays by different playwrights. So this one starts off in a similar fashion with Agamemnon by Aeschylus, but then she includes Electra by Sophocles, followed by Orestes by Euripides. And I would say before, I had read this book, all of those playwrights had kind of blurred into my mind as similar, and I wasn't exactly sure like what the difference in their style was, but I like that Anne Carson put them in the order from like the oldest play to the newest play, and I'm pretty sure Euripides was at least 100 years after Aeschylus. Now, for us, they're all like thousands of years old, so they seem comparably old, but actually you could really see the style and their attitude towards the subject matter change. So that's what I found was really thrilling about this translation, is it really helps show you how each of these playwrights has like a different perspective and a different purpose with their drama. So Aeschylus is kind of more of like the traditionalist in the sense of he's just like presenting this story in a dramatic fashion. But by the time you get to Orestes by Euripides, you see how much drama has changed, and Euripides just seemed so much weirder than the other two. He was so cryptic and strange. When you retell a Greek tragedy, as a playwright, you can't really change what happens, but you can truly change how you present those characters and how they respond to the events and what's going on in like the inner workings of their mind. So Anne Carson really helped me like get a better look at the differences between all of these amazing playwrights. So that's why I kind of have to have these 2 on here together. This version to me represents like the true story, just watching the tragedy happen, the downfall of this cursed family. I also love how this trilogy is really exploring the power of justice and like what it means to do the right thing. I think that's part of the reason why I love Hamlet by Shakespeare so much. I'm so interested in the conflicts of like trying to do the right thing for your family. What does revenge look like? What does honoring your parents truly mean? This series of plays is dealing with the same thing. But what I find really fascinating about Greek tragedies too is having that chorus on stage. This group that's kind of representing public opinion, where they're like directly commenting on the actions of the characters as they're happening. It kind of reminds me of like people today who are on Twitter talking about celebrities and what they're doing. It's like, yeah, we're kind of removed from that life, yet we're fascinated by the lives of other people and their decisions and their drama. And we always want to share our opinion and have our say about that. So I feel like the role of the chorus is also just endlessly fascinating. So yes, these plays really rocked my world this year. They're so menacing, they're so discomforting, and they really just like make you question all of your values in a really fascinating and fun kind of way. They're also just like rollicking good times. So yes, if you haven't checked out Greek tragedies in a while, please do it. And also check out the Oresteia in particular. Also Anne Carson's translation. Probably not the most faithful, but certainly an immaculate and thought-provoking piece of translation. So that is it for my best books of the year. You can see them here on this beautiful stack behind me. So I hope you enjoyed hearing a bit about the books that really made my year in 2021. And thank you for bearing with me. I know I'm a bit rusty and out of practice for filming YouTube videos, but I also hope that you'll let me know what some of your favorite reads were for this year. Did you have any random classics or anything sneak up on your list that you weren't expecting? I'd love to hear what your best books of the year were. So thanks again for checking out this video, and I do hope to see you in another one sometime soon. Take care. Bye. I haven't filmed a thumbnail in a good amount of time. That wrist pain, so nostalgic.